They said he was just a cranky old man with a slow dog and too many opinions. That's what the neighbor muttered when Harold Benton shuffled past, cane tapping the sidewalk like a metronome for Daisy's careful steps. Some mornings they joked that the leash was more for him than her, that it was a miracle they both hadn't fossilized mid-crosswalk. No one saw the way Hal paused at every corner, scanning windows, noting the angle of parked cars, cataloging everything with muscle memory trained in hostile terrain. And no one asked about the faded patch sewn into the inside of his jacket or the dog tag that dangled from Daisy's collar like a forgotten relic. They didn't care. Not until the van came. Not until the driver slammed his door like the world owed him speed, stepped out of his branded vehicle with AirPods in and deadlines on his watch, and saw a dog in his path as nothing more than an obstacle. He didn't hesitate. One sharp kick meant to scare, he'd say later, and Daisy yelped so loudly it made Hal stumble sideways into a mailbox. The driver scoffed. "Leash your mutt, old man," he said, brushing past like Hal was already part of the sidewalk. Hal didn't curse, didn't threaten, didn't even get up right away. He just reached for Daisy, shaking, not from weakness, but from restraint. Then, slowly, methodically, he pulled out a weathered flip phone that hadn't rung in weeks, scrolled through 2 names, and called one. Andy Quinn, the same woman who once said, "If the world forgets what you did, I never will." So if you believe that age should never erase honor, that respect is earned not by noise but by quiet legacy, like and subscribe, because what happened next started with silence. But it didn't end that way. 10 minutes later, that driver's shift was over, and not because he clocked out. It wasn't the first time Hal had been dismissed. It just happened to be the last. Back then, Hal Benton led a unit that crossed minefields under moonless skies. These days, he walked Daisy across cracked pavement under disinterested stares, but the instincts never faded. The second the driver's foot moved, Hal knew the angle, the trajectory, the casual cruelty disguised as impatience. Daisy had served, too, in her own way, a retired PTSD therapy doc. She never barked, never pulled, just watched and walked. Hal had trained her himself after the VA said there was no program for his kind of injury, the kind that doesn't show up on scans but never leaves your spine. She took care of him when no one else did. So when she cried out, Hal didn't just feel pain, he felt dishonor. But what the driver didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that the man with the cane had contacts deeper than LinkedIn could map. Andy Quinn hadn't just served with Hal, she owed him her life. These days, she was VP of Security and Risk Operations at the same delivery company whose logo was now burned into Hal's memory like the patch on his uniform once was. And 10 minutes after that call, 10 minutes after the driver had kicked a living piece of Hal's soul, Dispatch shut his app down. Live. Mid-route. "Return the truck immediately," came the cold message on his device. "Security is waiting." In a small vet clinic 2 blocks over, Hal held Daisy's paw while the vet assured him nothing was broken, just bruised ribs, some swelling, and a lot of fear. Hal nodded once. Didn't tell them what happened. Didn't file a police report. He didn't need to. Back at corporate, a file had been pulled, footage reviewed, and a phone call was made. One that started with, "Is this how we represent ourselves to the very people who made this country possible?" Andy didn't mention the medals Hal never displayed or the commendations sealed in a box above his dresser. She didn't need to. The footage spoke. The timestamp spoke. And soon, the silence of the company's social feed broke too. A post went up. "We stand with those who stood for us. There is no excuse for disrespect. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Benton, and Daisy, for your continued service." The neighborhood noticed. The same people who once laughed at Hal's slow steps now offered quiet nods, stopped their cars instead of rushing him along. One could even painted a small sign and planted it near the crosswalk. "This is Daisy Street." Hal didn't smile. He just adjusted Daisy's collar, looked once over his shoulder at the sidewalk where it all happened, and kept walking. Not because he forgave it, but because he had walked through worse and never stopped. The dog was healing. The world, maybe not. But for the first time in a long time, someone looked twice. And that was a start. They say revenge is loud, but what happened that day wasn't revenge. It was protocol, justice wrapped in silence and speed, executed by people who understood exactly who Al Benton was, even if the world had stopped asking. While the delivery driver, name, Kyle Renz, age 26, 0 military background, 1 year of spotty employment, rolled up to his next stop, still grumbling about the fragile old man and his mutt. The gears behind the curtain were already grinding. His app had just blinked red, locking him out of his next drop. Session expired. The screen read. Then, report to dispatch immediately. He scoffed, assumed it was a glitch, but a call came through seconds later. No number displayed. Mr. Renz, the voice said, clipped and calm. Return the van. Now. He didn't know who was speaking, but the tone was final, professional in a way that promised escalation. Back in the regional headquarters 23 miles away, Andy Quinn stood in the Security Oversight Division flanked by two monitors, one playing the internal footage from Kyle's dash cam, grainy but clear enough, and the other open to a personnel folder stamped, Tier 2 temporary clearance. She hadn't aged much since she last saw Hal. He'd saved her life in Hellman during a night raid gone sideways. She still carried the burn scar from the explosion he pulled her out of. When his name came up on her screen, Hal Benton, incident flagged by VIP legacy contact, she didn't hesitate. Flag it for executive attention, she told her assistant, and shut his route down before he delivers anything else with our logo on it. In the footage, Kyle can be heard muttering under his breath, then pivoting sharply and kicking Daisy out of his way like a soccer ball. The sound Daisy makes isn't loud, but it's heartbreaking. And Hal's fall? It's hard to watch. He didn't even check on the dog, Andy murmured, pausing the video. Didn't even look back. She didn't need time to consider. She opened a direct channel to Logistics HR, then sent the footage with a single sentence. Immediate termination required. Explanation to follow. It took 6 minutes. 6. That's how long it took for the chain to fire. First the alert went to dispatch, then to risk, then to regional HR. The company, already under pressure to strengthen its public image post-scandal, couldn't afford a PR meltdown involving a service animal and a veteran. And the worst part? Kyle had signed a respect and conduct to public contract 3 months earlier, ironically during a training video about honoring military families. While Kyle drove back in his locked van, cursing at his unresponsive GPS and whining to no one about boomers and their emotional support animals, Hal was sitting quietly in a vinyl chair in the waiting room of Westside Veterinary. He didn't have social media. He didn't text. He just sat with Daisy's head on his lap and one hand resting gently along her ribs, feeling her breathe. She's gonna be okay, the vet had said. Scared, sore, but no fractures. You want to report it? Hal only nodded once, then whispered, handled. And it was. Because back at headquarters, the final hammer came down. Kyle returned to the loading dock, where two people from internal affairs waited by the delivery door. Keys, badge, tablet. One of them said, "You're done." "What?" Kyle barked, genuinely shocked. "You serious? You're on camera assaulting a dog. That dog belongs to a decorated Marine. That Marine is a legacy asset. You're lucky we're not pressing charges." It was just a nudge. Kyle snapped. That mutt was in my way. The guy didn't even say anything. He didn't have to, the IA officer said, holding up the tablet showing a still from the footage. Your actions said everything. Kyle was stunned, enraged, indignant. Wait until social media hears about this, he bluffed. But they already had. The company's official feed had posted a message moments earlier. Respect is not optional. Our employees are held accountable. Today we honor Staff Sergeant Hal Benton and his service dog Daisy for their grace under cruelty. We're sorry, and we're better because of them. The post had been live for 8 minutes and already had 11,000 shares. Kyle's name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Someone had leaked the clip. A local vet tech, maybe, or a neighbor. Either way, his face was now circulating faster than a press release. That night, local news did a quiet segment. No dramatic interview, just an anchor reading the facts, a blurred video of Daisy limping, and a still image of Hal in his faded coat helping her into a cab. But one person who saw it had clearer footage. A young lieutenant named Charles Marin, who once served with Andy Quinn and remembered Hal's voice during radio comms that saved their convoy. He reached out to the company with a statement. Then another veteran did. And another. Stories trickled in. He saved my squad in '83. He trained my father. He gave me his coat when my gear was lost in Afghanistan. Hal had no idea. He just fed Daisy that evening and sat beside her on his porch as the streetlights came on. He didn't know Kyle was jobless. Didn't know the company's CEO had forwarded a personal apology through Andy's office. Didn't know that Daisy's name had trended for 3 hours in a thread titled Dogs That Served. He didn't care. The justice wasn't in the firing. It was in the fact that for once, no one questioned his story. No one asked him to prove he mattered. Daisy licked his hand. His thumb brushed her fur like the pages of a journal never written. For once, Hal Benton didn't have to explain who he used to be. The world remembered on its own. It didn't make the evening paper, and Hal Benton wouldn't have read it if it did. But the story made its way to places that mattered more. In military circles, it spread like a quiet fire, shared not by headlines, but by word of mouth, email chains, and private veteran forums where the code of respect still meant something. The man with the cane and the dog. He had become something more than a local incident. He was a reminder, not of what could happen when someone disrespects a vet, but of how one man, saying nothing, could command an entire institution to remember its spine. It started subtly. A chalk drawing on the sidewalk outside Hal's building, Daisy's paw print, encircled by the words, guarding him as he did us. Then the florist down the block taped a handwritten note to Hal's mailbox, for Daisy, a hero in her own right. A week later, a representative from the delivery company arrived, not PR, not legal, just a woman in a plain navy jacket. She didn't knock at first. Just waited at the foot of Hal's steps with a box wrapped in neutral brown, standing at attention like she'd been trained to. Hal opened the door quietly, Daisy watching from behind his legs. "This isn't about making it right," the woman said, voice calm. "It's about not pretending we ever had the right to ignore you in the first place." Inside the box was a custom silver medallion, engraved with both their names, Daisy and Hal, service without silence, and an apology letter hand-signed by the CEO. Hal read it once, then folded it, slipped it into the old shadow box with the rest of his life's medals, and closed the lid again. "Let the box get heavy," he whispered. "Let it mean something." But that wasn't the end. Word reached the Veterans Legacy Foundation, and a small ceremony was scheduled, not in a hall or auditorium, but at the corner park where Hal and Daisy walked every morning. He didn't ask for it. They didn't announce it with posters. But on that Saturday, over 70 people showed up. Neighbors, old vets, kids with flags, 3 K9 units in dress harnesses. Some brought their own therapy animals. Some just brought respect. Hal arrived at his usual time, wearing his only press shirt, Daisy by his side in a new vest that read, "Still watching." They walked the same path, but this time, people stepped aside not out of pity, but out of honor. A local officer approached and asked, with quiet reverence, if he could read something. Hal nodded. The officer unfolded a single page and began, "For Staff Sergeant Benton, and for Daisy, for service not given on command, but lived in every step. You reminded us that honor doesn't retire, and it sure as hell doesn't go quietly." The words hit harder than Hal expected. He looked down at Daisy, who blinked up at him with eyes that understood more than language ever could. Afterward, a young girl approached, no older than 7, shyly holding a drawing. "I made this," she said, handing it over. It was Daisy, cape flowing like a hero, standing tall next to Hal, whose cane was drawn like a sword. Hal crouched slowly, taking it in with a reverence he hadn't shown in years. "That's the best likeness I've seen," he said, voice rough with a smile. The girl beamed. "I want to be like Daisy when I grow up." Hal looked at her parents, who nodded. Then, started by listening before laughing, he told her gently. That's how Daisy started. The crowd dispersed eventually, quietly, with handshakes, salutes, and thank yous that Hal never asked for. But they left more than memories behind. One neighbor, once known for calling Daisy that mutt, nailed a sign into the curbside oak tree, "Hal's Walk, protected by loyalty." And across town, in the office where Andy Quinn still kept Hal's picture on her shelf, a new policy was quietly adopted company-wide, Veteran Priority Awareness Protocol. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It just meant that employees were trained to recognize, respect, and respond. No more, just a dog. No more, just an old man. 1 month later, on a Tuesday no different than the one where it all started, Hal walked Daisy past the place it happened. The curb was still cracked. The sidewalk unchanged. But something in the air was different, lighter, warmer, like the way air feels right before rain after a long drought. A new delivery van drove by. This one slowed, rolled down the window. A young man, clean uniform, respectful tone, called out, "Sir, thank you for everything." Hal gave the briefest nod. Didn't stop. Just kept walking. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't in the shouting. They're in the silence after. When the world finally listens. When it shifts, not because you demanded it, but because you stood long enough, steady enough, to remind it how. And on that quiet street where Daisy padded forward and Hal followed, the wind didn't just rustle the leaves that morning. It whispered something, just once. They remember now. And this time, they won't forget.